It's November 6th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. presidential election. Polls are now closing, starting from the East Coast, which means vote counting has now begun. Vice President Kamala Harris secured an early win in Vermont, while former President Donald Trump did so in Indiana and Kentucky. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has himself confirmed that his country's forces have engaged North Korean soldiers, voicing worry such clashes have opened a new chapter of global instability. President Yoon is set to address the nation and hold a press conference on Thursday to look back on the first half of his term and announce what the public can look forward to for the remainder of his term. It's election night in the U.S. Polls are closing and vote counting has already begun in the final hours of Tuesday's presidential election. And early results are already starting to roll in. For more, we have our Kim Jung-sil on the line. Jung-sil, fill us in.
Tommy, results are pouring in as Americans headed to cast their ballots for their next president. Now, as of 10 a.m., many of the eastern and central states closed their polls, and we're seeing results. According to CNN, former President Donald Trump is projected to win Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia, which respectively carry 11, 8, and 4 electoral votes. Now, Indiana and Kentucky were among the earliest to finish voting, closing polls at 8 a.m., with West Virginia closing polls just in half an hour ago. The early vote returns may not clearly indicate who will win eventually due to varied vote counting rules, so we'll have to wait for the final outcome, which may also depend on how quickly key swing states can report their results. Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in particular have absentee ballot procedures that could require sometimes days to complete. As of 10 a.m. Korean Standard Time, polls have closed in many eastern and central states like New Jersey, Alabama, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Tennessee. To avoid any confusion, I am mentioning all the times in Korean Standard Time. About half an hour later, at 10:30 a.m., polls close in Arkansas, which has 6 electoral votes and is likely to support former President Trump. At this point, polls will now be closed in half the states. Now, this year's race is so tight that the battleground states will be pivotal in determining the next U.S. president. Polls in the battleground states of Georgia closed at 9 a.m. and North Carolina closed at 9:30 a.m. These both have 16 electoral votes each. The New York Times predicted that both those states would generally count fast. In the coming hours from 11 a.m., polls will close in 15 states, including the swing states of Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Polls will also close in some of the most populous states like Texas and New York. Now at noon, the final battleground states, Nevada, will close its polls. At 1 p.m., the poll will close in 4 states, including California, Oregon, Washington, representing a likely haul of Democratic votes. And the final votes will close in Hawaii, one of the bluest states in America, at 2 p.m. Korea Standard Time. In Alaska is a safe Republican state that finishes voting at 3 p.m. Out of the 538 electoral college votes, the winner needs 270 electoral votes to have a majority. So that's the update until now.
Right. Jung-sil, so Harris and Trump claiming wins in their reliable states. While we wait for more results to come in, let's talk about the exit polls.
As for exit polls, CNN reported using its national exit poll that 46% of the voters have a favorable view of Vice President Kamala Harris, while about 42% view former President Donald Trump positively. This is so close, and it was kind of expected when we saw the very first result from Dixville Notch, a tiny township in New Hampshire yesterday that had an even split with 3 votes for Vice President Kamala Harris and 3 votes for former President Donald Trump. And this suggests, I'm mentioning this poll because the result of the Dixville, because it is the earliest vote result. And it suggests that we're seeing what's shaping up as a competitive race with key battlegrounds still voting or just starting to count votes. For now, it's a tight showing as we wait on more states to report. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Dami.
All right, Jung-seo, thank you for that report. Now, counting down less than 5 hours until the polls close nationwide, Americans are still making sure to vote so their votes do count. We are joined again by Voice of America correspondent Chris Keskehill. Welcome back, Chris.
Good to be with you.
So, Chris, you are over in Michigan, where vote counting will commence in the coming hour. Now, how has the election day been over in Michigan?
Well, the polls just closed within the past 5 minutes, but anybody who was in line as of 8 p.m. will still be allowed to cast their ballot because they were already in line. Now, the vote has been going pretty smoothly here in Michigan. There have been some small problems. A voting precinct in a suburb called Northville, which is in both Wayne and Oakland counties, so it's part of suburban Detroit. They had to relocate on election day today because they had a gas leak temporarily. Now, Oakland County, which is a prosperous and heavily populated county to the north of us, had brief issues with vote tabulators on election day, but they were able to bring in backup tabulators, so those ballots should have no problems. Now, election officials here in the state of Michigan said that same-day registration had hit 3,700, so there's 3,700 new voters in the state. And in the major city here in Detroit, 95% of the early and absentee and mail-in ballots have already been counted today because they were allowed to count them starting 8 days before the election. So Detroit, which is the biggest city in the state, could have its votes counted by the end of the night or tomorrow, which means Michigan, we could have Michigan's result, whether it went for Trump or Harris, tonight or tomorrow.
Right. I'm sure there were thousands of people who voted. Now, the question is, what did some of the voters, in Michigan have to say about the election before and after casting the ballot?
Well, I spent most of my day in Dearborn, Michigan, which is the first Arab majority city in the U.S. And a lot of the voters there are angry about the war in Gaza. They have family in Gaza and Lebanon, so it affects them personally. And 46% of the population in Dearborn, which is about 110,000, is Muslim. So this is an issue that hits close to home for them. A lot of the people we talked to didn't even want to go on camera to let us know which candidate they supported, but they said they cannot support a candidate who would keep the killing going on in these places. So whether they voted for a third-party candidate, whether they voted for Harris or Trump, they didn't even want to say.
Well, I'm sure the most anxious people at the moment are the two candidates, Harris and Trump. What are the two candidates up to on voting day?
Right. So Donald Trump cast his ballot in Palm Beach earlier today. Then he spent some time at his estate, Mar-a-Lago, and now he should be headed to a celebration, what he hopes is a victory celebration, and he can give a victory speech sometime tonight at the Palm Beach County Convention Center. Meanwhile, Harris spent her day in Washington. She was at the Democratic National Committee meeting with some of the people who were phone banking on her behalf. And then she will be heading to an outdoor celebration at her alma mater, Howard University, a historically Black college and university in D.C., and she hopes to give her victory speech tonight. But of course, we might not have any of the results in by the end of the night. So These could just be celebrations marking the end of their campaigns.
So we do know it could take days, or we have to wait possibly days to see who actually wins, but who formally declares the winner, at the end?
Well, this is important. A candidate cannot declare victory, especially before all the votes are counted. And they are just the presumed president-elect because there's a weeks-long and a couple of months-long process. Each state's electoral college electors meet in their state capitals. DC's meet in DC to formally cast their votes for the president and vice president on the first Tuesday and the second Wednesday in December. This year, that's December 17th. On January 6th, an important date, which we saw in 2021, Congress convenes to count the electoral votes and certify the winner of the election. Now, because the sitting vice president serves as the president of the Senate, Kamala Harris will actually preside over this count in 2025, just as Mike Pence did in January 2021 when Joe Biden officially became the president-elect. Now, each state called in alphabetical order follows its votes. Now, this process is normally ceremonial, but based on what happened last time around, the concession speeches happened long ago, but officially that is when the president will be decided, even though it seems like it's a mere formality by the time it's January 6th.
All right, Chris, before I let you go, briefly, what is next after a new leader is elected then?
Well, the transition begins. They start embedding their people within all the federal agencies, and it's a very quick process because they take the oath of office in January, the third week of January. So it's a very quick process. You'll start to hear names after, the states are called, and the winner gets 270 electoral votes within the next few days or so. And you'll start hearing, whichever candidate wins, you'll start hearing names of possible cabinet secretaries and cabinet heads and heads of agencies. So it'll be a very quick process once we know who is the eventual winner.
Well, it is going to be a long night, or rather an exciting and anxious next couple of days even. Thanks, Chris, for connecting with us today. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you as always.
And the two candidates are believed to have vastly different approaches to conducting foreign policy. So it's unclear how Washington's trilateral cooperation with Seoul and Tokyo will play out. Our Oh Soo-young has this report.
Trilateral ties between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo must remain intact, regardless of who wins the presidential election in the United States. According to experts speaking with Arirang News, both presidential candidates, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, would be advised to maintain the three-way cooperation with its East Asian allies. The leaders of South Korea, the United States and Japan at Camp David last year agreed to jointly handle North Korea's nuclear threat, work together for regional and economic security, and collaborate on advanced technology. Experts say as the Indo-Pacific region continues to see geopolitical rivalry, maritime and territorial disputes, and a nuclear North Korea, a Harris administration would likely maintain and further develop the Camp David framework. But a second Trump term raises question marks, given the former US president's track record of scrapping agreements and dealing with countries on a bilateral basis.
Any rational person serving in a Trump administration would look to that and try to maintain that, try to keep it in place, try to strengthen it by any means possible. But once again, we go back to the traditional antipathy that Donald Trump has expressed towards alliances and alliance partners. And it raises some questions about whether the leader of that administration, the Trump administration, would try to ignore or undermine what has been achieved here.
Another risk factor is Japan's domestic politics, as the governing party there is likely to prioritize turning around its low approval ratings and Japan's sluggish economy. Still, analysts say South Korea's growing prowess in security and advanced technology makes it an essential partner.
Given South Korea's strategic importance in East Asia, it has become an indispensable partner for the US and Japan in maintaining regional stability and countering threats from China and North Korea. South Korea plays a vital role, especially in intelligence in North Korea, and its strengths in semiconductors and military capabilities make it a crucial partner. The US and Japan heavily rely on South Korea's cooperation in these areas, particularly in securing stable supply chains and leveraging South Korea's technological advances in semiconductors.
President Yoon and new Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba agreed in October on the need to continue their three-way partnership. While Yoon's aides have also noted there is bipartisan support for the South Korea-US alliance in Washington and ongoing measures to institutionalize their cooperation with Japan.
Trump has his own very clear stance towards China. So therefore, if US, Korea, and Japan trilateral cooperation means something about countering China, the need for it will remain in place. And even though Trump comes in as the new president, the professionals who runs foreign policy and defense policy, even though we expect a lot of them to be replaced after Trump comes in, but those people who will replace the existing policymakers, even the newcomers, most likely will advocate the trilateral cooperation between South Korea, United States, and Japan to remain in place.
Regardless of who moves into the White House on January 20th next year, observers expect the three countries to hold a trilateral leaders summit by the year end, fulfilling their pledge to hold annual meetings at the top level. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has confirmed North Korean troops have joined the fight against his country, warning the international community that North Korea's involvement has opened a new chapter of global instability. Our Park Gun-woo has more.
A new chapter of instability. That's what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called the current situation on Tuesday local time, after confirming that North Korean troops are seeing combat alongside Russian forces against Kyiv.
The first battles with North Korean soldiers open a new chapter of instability in the world. Together with the world, we must do everything to ensure that this Russian step toward expanding the war, toward real escalation, that this step of his becomes a losing one, for him and for North Korea.
This comes after the U.S. said on Monday that they believe that at least 10,000 North Korean soldiers made their way to the Kursk region of western Russia, which shares borders with Ukraine. However, the U.S. State Department on the same day did not confirm that the North had been involved in battle yet.
We continue to be greatly concerned about the partnership between North Korea and Russia. We expected that it was likely that they would enter into combat against Ukrainian forces, and if they did, they would be legitimate military targets.
Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov said during an interview with South Korean broadcaster KBS on Monday that he believes up to 15,000 soldiers from North Korea are in Kursk. He added that many of those troops were yet to be involved in fighting, but would see combat in the following weeks after training. The minister also called for more support from South Korea and said he is negotiating a date to visit Korea with his delegation. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
13 UN member states, including South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, issued a joint statement on Tuesday, denouncing in the strongest terms North Korea's ICBM launch last week. U.S. alternate representative for special political affairs for the UN, Robert Wood, held a press conference at UN headquarters in New York on the same day, where he called Pyongyang's ICBM launch a clear violation of multiple UNSC resolutions, adding that the North has launched over 100 ballistic missiles since 2022. The joint statement also noted that the two members failed to condemn the launch, referring to Russia and China. After months of clashes over Israel's war efforts and politics, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The current foreign minister will now be the new defense minister as Israel continues its offensives in the Middle East. Lee Seung-jae reports.
While war continues to rage in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday announced that he has fired Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The Israeli leader pointed to significant gaps between the two.
Significant gaps were discovered between me and the Minister of Defense in the management of the campaign, and these gaps were accompanied by statements and actions that contradicted decisions of the government and the decisions of the cabinet. In light of this, I decided today to terminate the office of the Minister of Defense.
Netanyahu noted that while there was trust and fruitful work in the first few months of the war in Gaza, the last months saw that trust crack. The two have long been known to have been at odds, especially in regards to Israel's war efforts in Gaza. Gallant went as far as to tell a closed-door Knesset committee that the Israeli leader's goal of absolute victory in Gaza was nonsense. Replacing Gallant as the defense chief will be the current foreign minister, Israel Katz. Meanwhile, Israel continues its offensives in Syria on Tuesday with an airstrike on the Syrian city of Al-Qaysar near the Lebanese border. In a statement, the military said the airstrikes were conducted on Hezbollah weapons depot. It also marks the second Israeli airstrike in Syria in 24 hours, targeting what Tel Aviv claims to be Hezbollah sites. On Monday, the Israeli military said it conducted strikes on Hezbollah intelligence facilities. However, Syria's state news agency reported that the Israeli airstrikes targeted several civilian sites, causing material damage. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The Yoon administration is advancing into the second half of its five-year term. And this week, the top office is taking the time to brief the public on its achievements and upcoming tasks to fulfill. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
Reaching the halfway mark of President Yoon Suk-yeol's term in 1 week, the top domestic policy aides for President Yoon took time on Tuesday to explain what had been done so far and what the nation can expect for the second half. The 4+1 reforms, labor, education, medical, and pension, plus a low birth rate, were the first things emphasized, as they have been and will continue to be top of the agenda for President Yoon.
Supporting our children to grow into creative talents from fair competitions and enabling them to work in the fields they aspire to. Ensuring that all of our citizens can receive high-quality healthcare anytime, anywhere, and live without concerns about their retirement. This is the essence of the four major reforms.
The Chief of Staff for Policy said the key to all the reforms, however, was overcoming the current demographic crisis. The low birth rate has been an issue for the nation for a while, and there have been positive signs with the recent slight jump in the fertility rate and number of marriages. The goal is to reach a fertility rate of 1 by 2030.
We request the special attention and cooperation of the National Assembly for the swift passage of relevant laws, including the Government Organization Act, to enable the rapid establishment of the Population Strategy Planning Department, which will serve as a control tower in addressing the population crisis.
Second was the economy, while the economic indicators such as gross national income, which surpassed Japan for the first time this year, and inflation rate at 1.6% for September are low compared to other OECD members. Actual living for citizens has not been easy, especially for many small business owners. Unofficial also said there will be more budget allocated for small business owners and their financial burdens from debt as part of the efforts. Other topics the top office covered were future resources, safe environment, and fostering regions outside the capital. The occasion is being used to show the administration's motivation to finish the term strong.
However, none of this can be achieved without the support of our citizens. Legislative tasks also require active cooperation from the National Assembly.
This briefing marked the beginning of a three-part series of the top office's efforts to reach out to the public in light of its halfway mark. The second part will be on Wednesday, a briefing solely on diplomacy and national security. And the finale, of course, the president himself on Thursday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The weather surely has changed in the blink of an eye, from balmy autumn to early winter in a couple of days. Seoraksan Mountain, in fact, has been covered with 2 centimeters of snow since yesterday, so please drive and walk with extra care if you're near the area. Most parts are having colder morning temperatures today, and strong winds are adding more chill to the air. Afternoon highs will also be lower today. Then there will be an even colder morning ahead tomorrow, which is Ipdong, the onset of winter. Then the cold snap should ease on Friday. But keep your puffer jacket on today. Highs will be 1 to 4 degrees lower than yesterday under sunny skies nationwide. Seoul will only get up to 12 degrees Celsius. Daegu, Gyeongju topping out at 15 degrees. Jeju, meanwhile, is under a strong wind advisory this morning. Now, speaking of Jeju, it looks to be a rainy weekend for those on the island. But the rest of the country will have sunny skies and warmer temperatures. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Arirang News will be back at 5 p.m. Korea time.